I'm always worried about sequels like this, like sequels to shows that I feel are completed, regardless of when the sequel actually comes out. And for a sequel to show up years after the original has concluded. What do they think this is? Lupin III? The original animated series for Trigun ended in Japan in 1998. Now yes, the manga did go quite a bit beyond that, but even it ended in 2007. It was another 3 years until this film, Badlands Rumble, made it into Japanese theaters, and several years after that before English fans of the series like myself could finally once again enjoy the wacky adventures of the desert alien super god Vash the Stampede. But the challenge of a film like this is not only to be good. That one is obvious. If the film's not good, the fans will crucify it. But specifically, in this case, it needs to feel like you are still watching the original, even after all this time. This is not an easy thing to do, especially since the original was made prior to the widespread use of digital animation. This was back when they still used cell animation to do anime. It's very different now. So even just the look and feel are going to be different no matter what, and there's nothing anybody can do about that. So few films and sequel TV series have been able to manage that recapturing of the original. So the question becomes, is Badlands Rumble one of them? Short answer, no. Long answer, maybe? Warning, this video contains spoilers for the original Trigun series. This shouldn't be too much of a surprise, as a lot of people consider Badlands Rumble to be a sequel to the original Trigun, even though technically it comes somewhere in the middle of continuity. It's a long story and we'll get to that. But if you haven't seen Trigun, I recommend you go do it. It has my full recommendation. It's on a short list of shows that I think that you should watch before you die, and if you haven't seen my review on it, there'll be a thingy somewhere over here that you can click on. So now, ladies, gentlemen, and others, my name is Arcada, and welcome to Glass Reflection. Today, Trigun, Badlands Rumble. Let's jam. One of the tough things about this film from the get-go is that you don't really know when it takes place. The film starts off with a bank robbery that happens to be going extremely well. Our lead antagonist and a few of his lackeys charge into a bank and successfully bypass all the ridiculous traps between them and the vault of money. The mistake they make, however, was to eventually turn on one another without realizing who they had tied up in the corner. With any sort of mutiny, violence is involved, usually with the intent to kill, and our hero, Vash the freaking Stampede, will take none of this shit. So Vash stops the robbers from killing one another, the flunkies escape, and our lead bad guy, Gasback, very weird name, Mr. Gasback, gets to walk away with his life and no money, all the while screaming inwardly, "I will have my revenge!" or something. We then jump ahead 20 years to present day, which is an interesting thing to say because at this point you realize that what you just watched was a prequel taking place 20 years prior to when we first met Vash in episode 1 of the series. I didn't actually realize that Vash had a bounty on his head for this long. I would have thought that that would have been an interesting plot point that they would have brought up in this series, but then again, that could just be a continuity error. I'll get to those, though. So after 20 years, Gasback wants his revenge. He wants to pull off the greatest heist of his career and decides that stealing everything back from the flunkies who wronged him previously is the perfect way of doing that. Said flunkies have actually done rather well for themselves after that initial heist, with one of them becoming the mayor of a whole town, who can afford the highest amount of security we've ever seen in the history of Trigun. Also, this giant-ass statue of himself. None of this will save him, though. And that's kind of the thing. From this point on, it plays out like any traditional episode of Trigun would. The heist continues, and of course, Vash and his friends Wolfwood, Millie, and Meryl get mixed up in the whole thing, not because they have a stake in any of it, but generally because they are good people that in some cases just have to do bad things. It is a mad world out there. What a lovely day! The majority of the story actually likes to focus on a particular facet of Vash's character, specifically his rather unique set of morals. As a reminder, should you need it, Vash is a person with the steadfast belief that all life is sacred. As such, if he has the ability to stop the death or injury of a person, he does so. Of course, since his skills and abilities are borderline MacGuffin-esque in nature, this works perfectly fine for him because he's able to more or less stop any situation that he is put into. But when everyone that he saves includes mass murderers who then go on to, murder people once they're out of his reach, the ramifications of his moral beliefs become borderline absurd. The original series tackled this nicely, with Vash's brother Knives going on to senselessly murder hundreds and hundreds of people just to get Vash's attention, and those who followed Knives, such as Legato Bloomsummers, who would set up ultimatum-like situations to force Vash to break his rule and kill people. Badlands revisits this moral dilemma heavily by having Vash keep the antagonist Gasback alive, thus, in turn, making him partially responsible for the lives that Gasback ended following their encounter, as well as the fate of those lives affected by Gasback's rather costly heist. The film introduces a new character specifically for this purpose, a bounty hunter by the name of Amelia. She fits into the story by, on the surface, just being another bounty hunter, out for the wanted reward on Gasback. However, in actuality, she wants revenge for the death of her mother. Apparently, her mother died due to some unexplained until the final reveal reason that was entirely Gasback's fault. But also, this death happened post the bank robbery at the start of the film, which allows Vash to get labeled as partially responsible since he let Gasback escape with his life when he could have stopped him. Personally, though, I don't feel like the film was able to tackle this issue very well, as Vash was never forced to directly confront the issue head-on. Instead, he continued on blindly like he normally does until the stars started to align and everything just happened to magically fix itself from a moral standpoint by the end of the film. Now, this also does lead into the question of where the film actually fits in as far as continuity is concerned. Due to various character interactions, one can deduce that all the major players of Trigun, Vash, Wolfwood, and the Insurance Girls, know one another quite well, which places this film post-Wolfwood's introduction in the series. But, since none of the characters are traveling together just yet, it's not so far in the series that such a thing has occurred. Also, there are several shots of the completely intact moon, which got a rather large hole blasted out of it in episode 16. So by all accounts, Badlands Rumble most likely takes place between episodes 11 and 12, as episode 12 is when Legato makes his first major appearance, and the fights with the gung-ho guns start to become a staple of the series from then on out. Though personally, and this might sound like a bit of a weird theory, I don't think that Badlands Rumble is supposed to fit within the show's continuity. Instead, I feel like it's supposed to be viewed solo on its own as just an adaptation on the chapter from the manga from which it is based. Now, the only things I have to go on is that it would explain two things. One, it would explain why Amelia has never before been mentioned or shown up anywhere in anything else Trigun related, and B, it would also explain the relationship between Vash and Wolfwood. Because in the film, Wolfwood seems to care a lot about Vash. Sure, by episode 12, they have a mutual respect for one another, but I keep getting the feeling that the relationship we see in the film is closer to what they had near the end of the series, and not just how they were 3 episodes after they met. Now, this could just be me. Maybe it would look differently if you watched it in chronological order, but that's the feeling that I got. Now, moving on, like the series, the film was produced by Studio Madhouse. And this film continues my belief that Studio Madhouse makes absolutely balls-to-the-wall amazing films. It's just usually the series that are kind of hit and miss occasionally. One of the things I wanted to bring up with the animation, though, is just the style of this film, as the change from cell animation to digital animation is very noticeable. It's like part of the graininess of the old cell animation added to the charm of the show, helping to give this feel of the desert wasteland that the story takes place in. With the digital stuff, everything just seems a lot smoother and cleaner. Now, of course, that said, the animation is rather stellar, and to be completely fair, Trigun has never really looked this good before. But there are times where it just doesn't feel like Trigun. The other thing that adds to this is, of course, well, the dub. Now, I do want to say that the dub for Badlands Rumble is really, really good. It is a solid dub that, honestly, was a lot better than I expected it to be. But, as good of a dub as it is, I don't feel like it was a good Trigun dub. And it's mostly due to the fact that there were quite a few actor replacements. In fact, the only returning voice is that of Johnny Young Bosch, who reprises his role as Vash. Now, I don't claim to be an expert on why Bosch was the only returning cast member. All I have to go on are rumors of Leah Sargent's retirement from anime roles, which isn't too surprising since she hasn't voiced one since 2005, as well as the apparent stories about how Dorothy Fawn and Jeff Nimoy were offered the chance to reprise their roles. However, it was not financially feasible for them to fly down to Texas to do the recording, so everything just kind of fell through. It just seems like a really odd scenario considering Funimation's previous history with things like the Slayers dub of being able to get the gang back together. Regardless of how or why this happened, their absence is very noticeable, and while their replacements did a very admirable and serviceable job at voicing the characters, it's just not the same. Now, as far as the music goes, before, I summarize this whole shindig, I do have one complaint, and I believe that it is a very valid one, in that the lack of Trigun's theme, HT, is very depressing. And here's the thing, the song actually exists, and it does actually play near the end of the film. But the segment is so short that you don't even get a good feel for it. It's recognizable, but it wasn't played in a way that made you feel like, fuck yeah, it's Trigun! And I really wanted them to do that. At least when they played Tank in the Cowboy Bebop movie Knocking on Heaven's Door, they did it front and center. This just feels like a token play of the song that was just kind of wedged in, and it disappointed me is all. So here's the deal. I'm not entirely sure who this film was for. To my knowledge, Trigun never did exceedingly well in Japan, and according to the DVD extras, Trigun's mangaka Yasushiro Naito explains that Badlands Rumble was made in response to requests from Western fans for a sequel to the original anime. As such, I don't know if it was worth it. Ultimately, what we have is just kind of one extra long episode of the show, delivered to us 10 years after the fact, or in my case, since I only just watched the film, 15 years. But you know what? As much as I've ragged on this film, because it's very easy to rag on this film, there are a lot of flaws that are very noticeable, I don't feel like it wasted my time. As a fan of the original series, I am glad that this exists, and I'm surprised that it even happened. It wasn't something that I expected to happen. I never expected a series that ended so long ago to get any sequel, let alone one of this quality. A sequel that didn't screw with my perceptions of the characters or the world that they lived in. Sure, it may not have been the best possible film that we got, but I still think it was worth my time. Others may feel differently, as the flaws are kind of hard to ignore, but I don't feel that one should discount it based solely on that. And so, with all that in mind, I present Trigun Badlands Rumble with the recommendation to stream it rather than buy. Now, I realize how horrible this sounds, mainly because the only place on the internet you can actually stream the film is on Hulu, which, besides being American only, is a rather annoying service to boot. So here's my caveat with the recommendation. If you are a fan of the original Trigun series, for all the faults that this film has, it is still a buy. However, if you are only slightly entertained by the series, then Badlands Rumble is nothing to go out of your way for, so feel free to skip. It doesn't add anything that cannot be gained by watching the original series, and is just kind of more fan service if anything, though not in the modern sense of that term. For alternate anime recommendations, I am first going to point you towards the previously mentioned Knocking on Heaven's Door. It's the Cowboy Bebop film that I think is the quintessential example of a sequel-prequel anime film done right. Also, stealing my recommendation from the original series is Outlaw Star, a series that is far more sci-fi oriented, but still worth the look if you are a fan of the original Trigun. So between those two, you should hopefully find something to your liking. And that's it from me. Please subscribe if you enjoyed the video, follow me on Twitter if you feel so inclined, and hey, if you like what I do here and feel like helping out, please go and check out my Patreon page, and if you feel it within your heart, please consider donating. Very special thanks to Joshua Garcia, Dark Crow the First, Jack the Nekomimi Taku, Grace Anderson, Walter Kelly, and Nicolai Grey for donating already. You guys are seriously amazing. Amazing. I'd yell there, but I might disturb some of the neighbors. So until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, stay frosty.